Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Underground. So today, just wanted to do another normal Intel update for everyone. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. Just for everyone who has been following our Afghanistan series, I'm still going to continue that. We're still working on some slides and some products for that, but this is not that brief. I will be talking a little bit about Afghanistan here at the end. But this is really a CONUS United States style brief. You can check out our other briefs if you're not familiar with the format, but yeah, this is just going to be our normal brief that we normally do. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the weather, just like always. So weather for ISR over the next 24 hours is going to be quite good. So like I mentioned, like I try to mention as often as I can remember, uh, keeping an eye out for good ISR weather is kind of a handy trait to have. It's always good to be able to look up at the sky and say, hey, this is really good weather for some kind of overhead surveillance, especially with the way the world is going and the way things are looking today, and with the topics I'm going to cover today, you'll see why this is important. But the bottom line is that over the next 12 to 24 hours, the United States as a whole will have excellent weather for any kind of ISR. It's going to be very clear, clear skies from the surface all the way up to where ISR assets would be located at. Also, we are in a green illumination cycle, meaning that the moonlight is very bright. That means that it's going to be very easy to see things with performance enhancing devices like night vision goggles and things like that. So any kind of force multiplication tool that relies on amplified light, like night vision devices, will be very effective over the next 24 hours. And as we can push into the next, at least the next 18 hours for all different kinds of cloud levels, not just the low level stuff, we can also see that the similar things going on there. All these high level clouds are pretty much few and far between for the majority of the United States. Florida's got some stuff from the hurricane slash tropical depression slash whatever it is now out there, and same thing up in the American Northeast. But for the most part, we're going to have clear skies no matter where you're at in the country. Pushing forward into NOTAMs, nothing significant to report on that front. Really, there's a couple of space operations, but by the time this airs, they will have expired, so there's no need mentioning them. Again, just wanted to mention that if you don't know what a NOTAM is or why it's important, we have a specific video on that, so it would be a great time to learn what this stuff is, because this is very basic level stuff. So moving forward into the civil unrest forecast, now we've got quite a few changes here. The biggest two changes from the last brief are Portland. Portland has been host to a significant amount of hostile activity from a variety of actors over the last couple of days, at least. The world's been kind of focused on Afghanistan right now in the past couple of days, so they've kind of ignored the shootings and the gunplay that's been going on in the street in Portland between either Antifa and just pick a group, right? It's going to be Antifa fighting them or them fighting Antifa, or groups that we can't even name because YouTube will censor us and remove this video. So yeah, you can check that out on your own time. I'll provide some sources in the at the end of this. But Portland, really big hotspot currently a very high state of civil unrest, particularly in the downtown region. Likewise, I'd also like to point out Phoenix, Arizona. I've upgraded it. Sorry, I forgot to get it updated on the map, but it's been updated to a unrest being highly likely, and that's just due to election stuff. So the election audit stuff is coming out, and it is how should I say this to avoid censorship? It is counter to what the mainstream and regime sources want you to hear. So that's the best way I can think of describing it. So all the Trump supporters out there will be pretty happy based on what limited data has come out about the election audit in Arizona. But again, me being the sort of pessimist on this front, I don't really think it's going to be that effective. But we can talk about that later when we get to it. Moving forward into logistics. So the western part of the United States is facing some pretty severe water shortages. This is due to a variety of reasons that you can research on your own, but for those of you who don't live in the area, you probably aren't tracking this as much as people who live in the area. and it's quite bad. And these things get compounded once we move into the critical infrastructure stuff on the next slide. But water shortage, big deal, probably going to get worse over the finishing of summer into the beginning of winter. Also, the microchip shortage has gotten much worse. Major auto manufacturers are making some serious efforts to combat that and figure out ways around it. Toyota actually just announced that they're going to cut global production of all of their vehicles by 40%. That is devastating. That's devastating, even for just one company. Toyota provides a significant portion of the uh, vehicle manufacturing for not just the United States, but for the rest of the world. And that is a huge deal. Volkswagen did the same thing, but they did not give a percentage on how much they're having to scale back, which is interesting. At least I haven't seen them give a percentage. Their press releases were just kind of like, yeah, we're having to scale things back. But it's probably similar to Toyota because they source a lot of their parts from the same places. Also, I forgot to mention on the water shortage, Lake Mead is now in a state of severe shortage. I don't know what terminology they're using, but power generation has been seriously affected by that. Also, the liquor shortage that we talked about that I mentioned last time it's still present and it has expanded to a lot of other areas, but it's really random. So I just left the icons where they were from last briefing. A lot of people all over social media are complaining about liquor shortages in their area and posting pictures of like empty liquor store shelves, but it's really hard to get a beat on where things are at. Our dude who mans the Twitter for us is having couldn't find really anything tangible to show you guys or be able to make an assessment as to where these are at, other than where the state liquor boards have issued statements, such as in these 3 states. And also, I should mention just very briefly that Costco has they're having another run, another shortage on toilet paper and bottled water. This, I believe, at this time, based on what limited analysis I've been able to do on it, this one seems totally social media driven. It doesn't have any sort of legitimate cause. It's like some journalist tweeted something because they went to a store one day in one Costco around the country. They tweeted it, and then there you go. Everyone reports on it because all the reports I've been seeing on the Costco toilet paper and bottled water shortage have been circular, meaning that you follow them all back and they all kind of come back to the same few number of sources. It's like an adult version of the telephone game, but it's more devastating than just a child's game like that. So, pushing forward into critical infrastructure concerns, there are 3 main things. 2 being cyber attacks. I just put the 2 biggest cyber attacks. There have been a significant number of cyber attacks over the past, gosh, 2 or 3 months. It's been I could probably spend hours and hours and hours just typing the actual number of cyber attacks, but the biggest ones have been T-Mobile. They had the personal data of over 100 million users leaked, breached, and it's currently for sale on the dark web, which is disconcerting if you're a T-Mobile customer. Likewise, Mitsubishi also had a cyber attack, and this is interesting because this was the defense infrastructure for Mitsubishi. So they provide a lot of the defense infrastructure for Japan and things like that. Even in the United States, they provide a lot of technical data and things like that. And defense, railway, and electrical power grid data was stolen. If you Google Mitsubishi cyber attack, you'll find that almost the exact same thing happened a couple years ago. Actually, I think it was in early 2020. They lost missile data. So defense missile data was lost to hackers. So Mitsubishi has kind of a history of this, losing defense data of all things. We're not talking about losing someone's T-Mobile password. They're losing the missile secrets and things. So that's not good. And then finally, like I mentioned, the water shortage out west is going to compound very soon into a power shortage because a lot of the electrical power for the West actually comes from hydroelectric facilities. And if you have something like the Colorado River dip really low, it reduces power generation. So, like I mentioned, these things compound. So, not only do you have very little drinking water for people, but you also have very little power. So, you're going to have these things tend to happen at the worst possible times, right? So, you're not just going to have to deal with one utility being out, but likely both. And as one gets worse, it's gonna bring the other one down with it. So that's something to be on the lookout for if you're out west. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir for those of you who live in those areas, and you know if you've been affected or how severe these things are. So really, just for situational awareness of anyone out there who's not living in those areas. And then moving on to the meat of the briefing today, significant governmental action. So I'm going to try to move through this as quick as possible because there is a lot of stuff and it's all kind of really depressing. So the first one is there have been a few more arrests for people using fake medical passports. This occurred in Hawaii. You can check out the link that I've got in the sources that will be at the end of this. But yeah, this just highlights a larger argument that any attempt to go against the federal regime, even to do things like traveling between states or buying food at this point, will be met with a lot of force. So these guys, the two guys that got arrested, I wish I could talk more about the actual circumstances of it, but I'm not entirely certain because all the reporting is coming from mainstream media, which is unreliable at best. But this just goes to show keep things on the down low as much as you can on that. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Moving forward into number two, which is YouTube has updated their policies, their content creator policies, to ban content that discusses prayer as a cure for the virus that shall not be named. This is kind of, once again, like everything we're seeing these days, it's just a foot in the door to outright banning religion on the internet or on their platform, in general. Now, a lot of people are going to make the argument, okay, fine, YouTube's a private company, they can do what they want. Well, here's the thing on that. For those of you who have not heard our many, many, many hours of content and podcasts and other videos on this topic, it is our opinion here that if a private company either gets a significant amount of tax benefits or is affiliated with federal agencies or is in some way controlling an overwhelming part of daily life for Americans, their protected status of the excuse that libertarians love to use of, oh well, there's just a private company, they can do what they want. Well, it kind of loses a lot of its steam as an argument, considering that what overwhelming majority of people get their news from YouTube nowadays. So yeah, that's how we feel on that for those of you who don't know, and that's why we're continuing to report on stuff like this, because it's just infringements are everywhere these days, and it's kind of rough out there. Also, speaking of infringements, moving on to number three, Bank of America has once again proven that they are one of the worst or most tyrannical banks in the country. They are pushing CRT training on employees here on the slide I have it, to an insane degree, which is about the best way I could put it in this censorship-rich environment. The source that I have in the sources, you can read about it yourself, but yeah, Bank of America is not exactly known as being an above-board bank. They have a long history of things being affiliated with gun control and things like that. So yeah, there you go. Also, point four, this kind of ties into the Afghanistan stuff, but I'm sure a lot of people have already heard right by now that the Biden administration / regime, whatever you want to call it, actually canceled a relatively unknown department within the State Department. It's a small office called the Contingency Response Bureau, and their job, they were stood up underneath the Trump administration, and their job was to serve as a conduit, a rally point, so to speak, for Americans that might be trapped abroad. Because we've had a lot of issues with this, like with the Philippines going downhill last year, civil unrest in Hong Kong and things like that. We kind of learned, hey, we need to have some kind of coordinated office specifically to help Americans get out of Dodge when things go sour outside the United States. And this department was created to handle that. I don't know how well it functioned. Honestly, I did not know that the department existed until a couple months ago, but it was canceled just a few months ago by the Biden regime, and I haven't seen any reason for why they did it. Probably funding, of course. They're trying to funnel funding to wherever they think it needs to go. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it's a very interesting little tidbit that it's one of those little dominoes that falls over months ago, and now the big Indiana Jones style boulder is rolling at us from that. And point number 5 is New York City is launching a new program. Which essentially, what they're doing is paying people to not shoot people. And this is actually not a new program. This is a program that has come out. It was created in California, of course, and New York City is adopting it. And it's very interesting. If you read the details of the actual program, it's going to be a monthly check that people get for not shooting someone. So if they don't get convicted or suspected of shooting someone, and if they meet with their sort of parole officer, they'll get a check. And this is for both ex-cons and people who are not people who have never been arrested or never convicted of anything. So interesting program, completely dystopian in nature, but it's interesting that if you look at the wording, it's almost like they're expecting a certain demographic of people to show up and claim the check for this, which is interesting to say the least. And then number 6, our boy Hunter, he's lost himself another laptop, as I'm sure a lot of people have heard by now, or maybe not many people at all, depending on how much this has been censored. Yeah, there's a video that came out. I can't show it here, of course, due to YouTube's policies, but he stated in the video that he thinks he lost it to the Russian mafia and that they are going to use that laptop and the promiscuous, illicit videos on that laptop to blackmail him. So there you go. That's all I'm going to say on that. I know that if I had done that, they'd throw me under the jail, but whatever. Moving on, we got more important stuff to talk about. So number 7, Rand Paul issued an interesting statement. I'm not sure how many people have seen it, in which he issued it was a few minute long video in which the primary message that has gotten out is his quote that he says it's time for us to resist, and quote, they can't arrest us all when it comes to things like these lockdowns and stuff like that. So our own feelings about Rand Paul aside, I think it's very interesting to see at least some politicians saying these words in this, context out loud. It's very interesting to see that. I don't know if it'll be effective. Again, politicians, we here just as part of our own analytical process don't trust any politician whatsoever or any elected official whatsoever. But it's interesting to see this rhetoric getting out there, if nothing else. Also, number 8, this is something that we have tried to do a lot of research on, but it's just the shadiest thing I've seen in a while. A lot of people are calling the headlines are that this was a false flag event. The short story is this guy drives his truck, which he has allegedly loaded with explosives and such, and parks right outside the Library of Congress, and has a standoff situation with the police. The problem is that it looks really, really fishy because it was right on the same exact day that people were falling off airplanes in Kabul. So it looked to a lot of people like it was just a distraction from what's going on, like it was your textbook false flag. This guy was allegedly in his own live stream video had a significant, devices and things like that, and all that kind of stuff, and it was well thought out and planned and things like that. And then he just immediately surrenders as soon as the police show up. The standoff was like less than an hour, so very fishy to say the least for a lot of people. And we're probably never going to hear anything more about it. It's just going to be lost to the internet. But I did want to record it here on this date for posterity, I guess. All right, so moving on to number 9, House Resolution 4953, basically banning most guns. Other gun channels who have better luck avoiding YouTube censorship than we do have talked a lot more about what this bill contains. So definitely check that out. Definitely actually read it. Don't listen to somebody actually just tell you what's in it. Read it. It's not that long. It's not that hard to read it. You just read it and you'll see what I'm talking about. Number 10 also had some interesting issues with their mail in ballots. So, a viral video that has gone around shows that a lot of specifically for the California recall election, which is a mail in only election, which is interesting how an elected official who had to create a recall election gets to dictate that the election is going to be held on his terms. But nonetheless, the ballots actually have holes punched in them. The envelopes have holes punched in them, and if you fold your ballot the wrong way, that hole on the envelope lines up perfectly to show how you voted. And a lot of people are claiming that this just makes it easier for people to look at the outside of your envelope, and without even having to open the envelope, they can see how you voted and they can decide what to do with that ballot. So I'll just leave it there on that so that we don't get censored yet again. I know I keep mentioning that, but it's really become a pain. And moving on to number 11 is that um, the Biden administration, as many people have already pointed out, has issued sanctions on Russia, but the sanctions are actually hurting the United States more because he is banning all Russian-made ammunition and weapons. So basically, all of your steel-cased ammunition will be illegal for import, at least not illegal for possession yet, but it's illegal to import, and that's a problem because for those of you out there who are not into AKs or steel-cased ammo, roughly 40% of all of the ammunition that is imported into the United States is Russian in origin. So that's a problem for you because guess what? 40% of the market is now going to be coming for your brass ammunition, and that is a huge, huge stab in the back for the gun community in a time when ammunition is already in very, very short supply. So yeah, very interesting timing on that. That's how I'll say that. And then finally, House Resolution 4980. This is the one that is alarming, very, very alarming, as well it should be. And it probably won't go anywhere just yet, but give it time. This is a bill, which I'll put it up here on the screen for you. It is a bill to put everyone who has not been jabbed with the medical treatment that shall not be named on a no-fly list. So, yeah, if that does not alarm you, and if I have to explain why this is a bad thing, check out our other content because this is just a prelude. Again, just a boot in the door. And if this is not an infringement on basic human life, I don't know what it is. So yeah, like I mentioned, it's in its very early stages, very very early stages. It was just filed like a week ago, or last acted on a week ago. So I don't know how quickly this is going to go through anything. I don't know if it will pass as it stands right now. Probably not. There's probably going to be some rioters on it. But yeah, very very alarming stuff while the world is stuck watching Afghanistan. And before I move on, I did not put it on the slide because I did not have time and I didn't want to put just one puck on a blank slide. But 75 doctors just walked out of their hospital in Florida for reportedly, this is of course coming from mainstream media, which is circulating the story like wildfire, but reportedly they're quitting because they are sick and tired of treating people who have not gotten the medical procedure that shall not be named. Um, Now, a lot of people are looking at this and saying this is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. It's turning it into the hypocritic oath because you're supposed to treat people regardless of why they're there. And a lot of conservative pundits and social media accounts are running with this one as to be expected. But I would just like to point out that at least with these doctors, at least they told you how they feel about it. before, and they quit their job rather than harm you with a medical procedure without your knowledge based on something like that. What would you rather have? A doctor that tells you that they hate you to your face, or would you rather have a doctor who pretends to be nice to your face but then gives you the wrong medication for an unrelated condition, which can make you worse, or they don't give you the best care that you can provide? So honestly, any kind of doctor that is willing to differentiate between patients like that is a good riddance, in my opinion, because they have no business anywhere near any medical facility whatsoever. That's all I'll have to say on that, and we'll move forward into Afghanistan. So, I'm sure a lot of people have checked out our recent content on this rapidly unfolding fiasco. But myself and the rest of the team here have put in considerable effort to provide as many resources as possible. So we've already got a handful of intelligence briefings by day. The last one covered 2 days, a 2 day period, and all of the briefs cover something different. So if you're just tuning in now to what the Afghanistan situation is, please check out those videos. That's about the best that we can do. Now, we also have other resources. So on our Odysee page, you can download all of the tools that we've created, all of the graphics, everything like that. And that should help, so at least maybe some people. Now, I should mention that the stuff that we're covering on the Afghanistan situation right now is really our main lines of effort are focused on getting Americans out and our allies at the same time. But we're really hyper focused on getting Americans out because the Americans seem to be having a very hard time getting to the airport, and that's something that we're desperately trying to help with, along with tens of thousands of others out there. So we're by no means really making a huge difference, but maybe we can make a little difference. So that's why we're dedicating so much time to this. Now, moving on to a topic that everyone is kind of getting a lot of feelings out of the way. Right now, there are a lot of people talking about Afghanistan and offering up their own opinions on the subject. But for us, when it comes to the Afghan conflict as a whole, and not just the recent rescue stuff, but the actual war itself, we're going to take some time to process this one and try to figure out a way to convey our thoughts for those who want to hear them in such a way so as to not be too long or insanely boring. I know I myself could talk about Afghanistan for days and days and not even scratch the surface. So we're gonna we're gonna take a page out of the Taliban's book and be patient on this one. We have a lot of time to talk about this war, and even more time to look back on it and learn from it. So that's what we're really trying to do. People can have their own opinions. That's all well and good, but really, when it comes to our organization here, we're trying to learn things and put those things into practice for when we might have to use them. So, plus, a lot of people have far more time in country than we do, and they have a lot to say about certain things, and we want to simply avoid echoing what others have already said about the whole Afghanistan conflict. But all of that being said, and considering the number of people out there that are looking for answers, the number of people out there that are kind of avoiding following the Afghanistan rescue mission stuff because it's just too painful to watch, I understand that. I completely do. I'm not going to fault anybody for not trying to help, because it is really a horrendously bad thing that a lot of people are dealing with right now. And because of that, I will take the time to lay out a few different sentiments that are going around. To put it simply, right now the Afghanistan fiasco is bringing up a lot of different wide-ranging issues. I would argue that most of the issues that are coming out regarding Afghanistan are far beyond the actual war itself, and perhaps even more important than the decades that we spent there. Perhaps most on the nose are the gritty details about the evacuations themselves. The government and the federal regime in the United States really screwing this up, and not really, when people pointed out that they're screwing it up, not really doing much about it. And we're just sitting here, and there's really not as much being done. Not everything that could be done is getting done, and the things that are getting done are very, very few and far between. So that's something that's being highlighted for a lot of people, and really that has really wide-ranging effects. Like in the international community, um, the U.S. International situation right now is a joke, honestly. Even though I personally have lived for years in the world of international diplomacy, I have never really considered any international issue to directly affect my day-to-day life. But these days, I'm not so sure. The consequences of globalism mean that something that happens on the other side of the world could affect you even before you find out about it. Um, and that's a huge thing to consider in today's world. And things can even strike really close to home. The gun control debate is being proven to be just pure insanity at this point by what's going on in Afghanistan. The raw nature of what's going on in Kabul right now, and the Taliban confiscating millions of weapons immediately, is something that nobody can spin. I don't care how much you want to try to warp what's going on, you just can't. And also a lot of the sort of wokeism that's going around surrounding the feeling of quote unquote oppression here in the United States. I mean, yeah, the footage in Kabul alone is enough to prove to anyone that certain groups of people that claim to be oppressed here in the United States clearly have no idea what real oppression is. Same thing applies to the concepts of freedom. A lot of people are observing what it's like to not have freedom. Watching the television screen and seeing the Taliban take over, that TV screen might as well be a window into the future of the United States, at least when it comes to the idea of freedom, right? No, the United States is not Afghanistan, but a lot of parallels are being played out in real time for the whole world to see. And even though people might not realize what they're thinking, they definitely feel it. And along these lines of a lot of old issues are being brought up and back out into the open again. And people who were not even alive for 9/11 are now starting to read history just a little bit. And they're starting to ask questions like, how is it that the practice of the chai boys and the production of heroin was banned under the Taliban when they were in power? But the U.S. government is well known to cover up the rampant abuse of children in Afghanistan, so much so that it's an atrocity that most U.S. soldiers remember about their deployment. And like 90% of the world's heroin now comes from Afghanistan. Like, what? How did that happen? We went from having some of the world's most effective, if not tyrannical. I mean, it's the Taliban, right? Some of the world's most effective counter drug operations being run by the Taliban throughout the entire country, and then like just a couple of years later, they're the world's producer of heroin. It's interesting, and people are starting to read, and this dirty laundry is getting aired, right? And speaking of the military, man, the military is just taking gut punch after gut punch these days. Senior military leadership is just purely insane, completely incompetent, and willing to step over a stack of bodies just to get that promotion or that position on the board of Raytheon. We and many others are now realizing just how crippled our military is, especially at senior levels. But finally, now some other people are starting to take notice due to the blatant lies that are being told. Like Milley stated that there were no indications that the Taliban could take the country in 11 days. That is a complete and utter lie. And you know who else knows it's a lie? Literally every man and woman who's ever set foot in that country. The fall of Afghanistan is proving how woke the U.S. military is, again, at the senior level, and this is devastating our nation. Almost every day, people are watching a nation collapse in real time. They're not seeing some black and white photo of Saigon days after the fact. No, we're all watching the ugly side of all wars in HD video. And that raw stuff, that uncensorable and unspinnable truth of how barbaric the world really is, well, this is something different from the blanket of propaganda that the overwhelming majority of Americans are living under 24/7. Everyone who was alive at the time remembers 9/11. Well, the fall of Afghanistan might now be as directly impacting on the homeland, but again, in a Snapchat and TikTok age, people are not going to forget this anytime soon. And perhaps even more significantly, witnessing the fall of a nation highlights just how vulnerable our own situation is. Now more than ever, the average American knows that to change our situation, F-15s and nuclear weapons are not needed. Granted, that idea is certainly going to embolden the people that have been salivating over the prospect of civil war for a long time now, but by and large, right now is the time in which most people have the potential to realize that we can change our situation. And it doesn't take a significant amount of military force to do it. This Afghanistan situation is bringing up a lot of things. Even the concepts of responsibility, integrity, and consequences are lessons that are being learned or not learned by a lot of people these days. No matter how much certain groups in society want to avoid personal responsibility for everything, the world finds a way of bringing that responsibility to your doorstep. Having the honor and the integrity to do the right thing, even when faced with adversity, is most definitely a dying art. And just because something is a human right, just because you have the right to do something, does not mean that there won't be consequences for doing so. Consequences are simply cause and effect. They don't have to be fair. At this point in time, if you take actions to resist the federal regime, you are going to have to understand that there are consequences for doing so. Just like those guys in Hawaii learned the hard way. In a time where liking certain social media posts is being labeled as terrorism, you have to realize that any form of resistance, no matter how small, will not be tolerated much longer. And the consequences for resisting anyway might mean that you have to significantly alter your lifestyle to avoid being arrested by agents of the federal government or the state or whatever you want to call it. Some people, like us, think that this arrangement is unfortunate, but we are willing to accept these consequences and, more importantly, the lifestyle changes that allow us to continue to exist even as an organization. Who knew that the end of the Afghan war would trigger thoughts like this, but here we are. But there is some good news. So, in trying to avoid ending on such a melancholy note, I've just off the top of my head thought up four really good things, or at least productive things that we can actually rely on moving forward into the future. So, number one is that quote unquote normal people are starting to realize that the true nature of the U.S. government, right? So, everybody's got that uncle right out there that you know they can be right 99% of the time, but if they present their arguments like Alex Jones presents his arguments, most people just don't believe it, even if it's true, right? Even if it's true, most people don't believe it. So most normal people, as in people who they don't understand what a lot of this stuff is, they're not very well read, or they're just living for the next Snapchat video, right? Those people are starting to realize that the U.S. government might not have their best interest in mind. And I won't go down the rabbit hole of the concept of governance itself, as I really think that argument is unproductive at this point. But this fiasco in Afghanistan is most certainly highlighting more than any other incident since probably the Snowden leaks what our government has become. At the risk of really ticking off all the libertarians in the room again for the millionth time, I think that most people think that some form of governance is an all right thing. Most people think this, right? We can argue about how much and what it should do and what it looks like. But for the most part, the idea of some kind of governing body is one defining characteristics of a nation state, right? However, now, perhaps more than ever before, our current government has lost its way, to put it lightly. And this Afghanistan debacle is indirectly pointing that out. Also, number two is this disaster is settling the debate on a lot of U.S. domestic issues. Like I mentioned before, everything from gun control to what some social groups in the U.S. call oppression is being destroyed in real time. People who think that they are oppressed are being proven to not be with every video clip that comes out of Afghanistan. So that's an interesting little side note that indirectly affects things. And number three is the precious and precarious nature of freedom has never been clearer in modern times. Freedom is a unique concept, or at least the U.S. version of it is. And this Afghanistan rescue disaster is bringing into context questions like, well, what is a right anyway? Who can grant rights? Who can protect them? Chances are, if you have even found this video, you already know the answers to these questions, but most Americans haven't even thought about it, since these philosophical concepts are, again, not exactly found on TikTok or OnlyFans. And finally, number four, this incident might be a good way to trigger people to think about ways of reducing tyranny in their own lives. Sometimes a good kick in the seat of the pants is what's needed to trigger actions. Horrific acts are usually quite motivating for those who witness them, and there have been a plethora of horrific actions during this Afghanistan disaster. People will remember what happened. Those thousands of Americans on the ground will remember too. And they will not just remember the atrocities of war. That's something that anyone who's experienced it never forgets, for better or for worse. But these guys will remember their cowardly and dishonorable officers and senior enlisted over them, who at every turn, at every decision point, decided to do the wrong thing. If they were sitting back stateside shuffling paperwork, we might not have known that they were dishonorable cowards, but we do now since they were put in that situation. And we will never forget that. So, yeah, hopefully that was helpful in pointing out at least some of the things that have been kind of orbiting out there, some ideas that have just been floating around, and people haven't really been able to grasp at because they feel a certain way about it. There's a lot of things going around. It feels a different thing about this whole Afghanistan situation, ranging from the people who could not care less and probably skipped right through this segment on YouTube, to the people who are actively on the ground who are trying to save as many lives as possible, to the people who are uninformed and they just don't know what to feel about it, to the people that are just kind of apathetic about the whole thing, right? I'm not pointing fingers or accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying that there's a lot of stuff going on, and before everybody tunes in to their favorite podcast, who's inevitably going to talk about this, it's just, I think, important to recognize that other stuff is going on and that a lot of opinions are out there. And yeah, hopefully that was at least helpful in illustrating that. So let's go ahead and close out with some international issues, some other things that have been going around. First, Australia. Australia has had an interesting time. We've gotten DMs and information from a lot of different people in Australia. Some people say it's interesting because Americans have this idea that Australia is basically the worst dystopian novel that you could ever imagine. Um, and the effect is clearly not illustrated by the Australians themselves. Some Australians, yes, some Australians are very highly concerned, vastly more concerned than Americans are with what's going on in their own country. But also, some Australians really don't care. So it's very interesting to see both sides of the coin on that. Some Australians are in the government and they say, hey, this is really not that, it's not as big of a deal as people are making it out to be. And then other people, civilians and citizens and things like that are saying, no, it's actually worse. So just remember to take everything with a grain of salt. I would agree that the situation in Australia does not look good from a U.S. context. And we have to be careful with putting United States values on another country. Even though Australia is very similar to the United States, when we speak the same language, we have a lot of the same cultures. However, we're different countries, and when forming analysis or forming opinions about another country, it's kind of, I would say, not the most accurate way to do it would be to implant your own American values on another country. Even if they seem to be more similar than dissimilar, they're dissimilar enough to mean your analysis will be skewed. So keep an eye on Australia. If you're in Australia and watching this, good luck with what's going on. But yeah, France is also dealing with much the same thing, but the French are a little bit more united. It seems to me like they're a little bit more united. A lot more people have been protesting in France over the same exact thing, or much the same thing. So that's going to be interesting to follow, especially with France dealing with the refugee crisis and things like that. Moving forward with the Afghanistan situation, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with their anti-lockdown protesters. And China, like I sort of briefly mentioned already, China has directly made threatening statements toward Taiwan, and they've directly stated that the U.S. will abandon Taiwan just like we abandoned Afghanistan. So, like I mentioned, this international stuff, man, it comes to a head real quick. And I can tell you, as bad as the Afghanistan situation looks, a conflict with Taiwan or with China, words cannot express how bad that's going to get immediately. So, once again, keep your eye on Froggy China, and they're going to do some interesting stuff over the next few weeks. I would almost certainly guarantee that they're going to fly a lot of missions into with their aircraft into Taiwan's air defense interdiction zone. That's most likely going to happen, at least until the Afghanistan situation gets tamped down, because, well, the world knows where our aircraft are, right? They're flying in and out of Kabul right now. So there you go. And finally, Iran is enriching uranium again. This one kind of got buried in the news this week, but they are indeed enriching uranium by several orders of magnitude more than what they're allowed to by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And yeah, whatever you feel about that, I guess everybody feels, again, different about Iran doing their own thing. But again, it's Iran, it's nukes, it's, something to definitely keep an eye on as we move forward into the future. So just wanted to give another shout out, another special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It has really helped us out a lot, especially with our rising costs and the situation here with where we're at. It really makes it possible. We've gotten to the point where we could not do it without you guys. So we really do thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts for everything that you guys do for us. So thank you once again. Here are our sources for this. I've got a couple more to add to this before I drop it. So this the PDF of these slides will be available on our platforms wherever you can find them. The links for the platforms, at least, will be in the description box. Usually it'll be on Odysee and a few other things as well. You guys on Patreon, you guys know you got the slides already. But yeah, thanks again. Everybody stay sane out there. Try to do the best you can. And we've got a busy few weeks ahead of us. So let's settle in for the long haul like always, and make sure we keep our head on a swivel for anything that might come out and affect us. So thanks again, and we will see you guys next time. And always remember, fight in the shade.